Right. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this wonderful Saturday. I hope your weekend is off to a great start. We're going to get started here in just a second. We're really excited for session 2 of Youth Advocacy Training for Ocean and Climate Action. And as we are waiting for everybody to filter in, if you guys want to go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat, let us know your name, your age, and if you are affiliated with a zoo, aquarium, or museum, what institution are you affiliated with? We want to know what kind of program you are working on and a part of. So yeah, we'll give it like 2 more minutes and you guys can go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. Aha, the chat is disabled. Give me 1 second. Let me fix that. Sorry about that. Thank you for flagging. All right, yeah, the chat should be good now. Apologies. So yeah, go ahead and introduce yourselves now. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for writing in the chat. We got some Cosley Zoo, Tulsa Zoo, Atlanta Zoo, Brookfield Zoo, National Aquarium, Zoo Atlanta, Blank Park Zoo, a couple more from Brookfield Zoo, Jenkinson's Aquarium, Akron Zoo, North Carolina Nature Center, Columbia Park Zoo, more from the Brookfield Zoo, Columbus Zoo and Aquarium, Cincinnati Zoo, Blank Park Zoo. Awesome. Yeah, really wonderful spread of folks. Really great spread of ages as well. Excuse me. Yeah, that's really awesome to see. We're really excited to have this discussion. Really amazing that all of you are here. I see some familiar names. I think some of you may have been on our call last weekend. And on that note, if you missed session 1, this is session 2. All of the recordings for youth advocacy training will be available on the World Ocean Day YouTube channel. Session 1 is already up, and this will probably be up on Monday. So again, welcome to Youth Advocacy Training. This is session 2 of 4. And yeah, we're going to get started here. Just to introduce myself, for those of you who do not know me, my name is Laura Johnson. I'm the Youth Program Supervisor for the Ocean Project. And this is my 5th or 6th time running this program, and it's just super enjoyable. And I'm really excited to have our lovely speakers here today. So this is our kind of run of show for today. Just got through the welcome. I'm going to introduce our panelists, then we'll jump right into the discussion, and then we will have a little bit of time for a Q&A at the end, and then I just have a couple of announcements as well. On that note of Q&A, I just saw, yeah, we have a question. Are these recorded? Where can I see the past videos? Like I said, up on the YouTube channel, they will be available probably the following Monday, potentially Tuesday, depending on how busy of a week I'm having on the World Ocean Day YouTube channel. And I will send that link in the chat momentarily. But yeah, with the Q&A, if at any point throughout the discussion, if you have any questions, feel free to just put them in either the chat or use that Q&A feature, and then we'll just address them towards the end. So yeah, without further ado, first things first, I'd like to introduce Dr. Cassie Friend. She is the Director of Science Communication at Frost Science Museum. She's got a phenomenal background in science and research, but also helps to coordinate events at the Science Museum. She's done a lot of really amazing research and does a lot of science communication as well. And I will let you guys also introduce yourself. But I also want to introduce our other amazing speaker, Liz Seminary, who's the Assistant Director and Signature Event for signature events and engagement at the Shed Aquarium. She's been doing events professionally for over 10 years. She's made a lot of impact throughout her career, and working at the Shed Aquarium seems to have really revitalized their events program. So yeah, without further ado, I will let both of you guys kind of introduce yourselves first, and then I will go into this first discussion.
Well, I'll go first. Since
Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
first on the slides, you all can call me Cassie. Yeah, I am the Director of Science Communication at the Philip and Patricia Frost Museum of Science in Miami. We just call ourselves Frost Science for short. We are a combo aquarium, planetarium, and science museum. So not solely aquarium, but the aquarium is one of our big draws. And my job is basically kind of anything that goes out to guests in any way passes through me to make sure that it's on brand and also accessible, interesting, engaging in terms of the science, and to make sure that we're getting the science right. As you can imagine, a very, very important aspect of the job. And I also help plan special events. We have multiple at the museum. Routinely every year, we do Tech and Engineering Day, we do Earth Day, we do World Ocean Day. We have a Halloween event, Spooky Science. So there's a lot going on.
Awesome. Thanks, Cassie. Go ahead, Liz.
Thanks, Cassie. Hi, everybody. I'm Liz Seminary. I'm the Assistant Director of Signature Events and Engagement at Shed Aquarium, which is, hey, my dream job, really. I've always loved to be around water, in the water. I grew up in Chicago, right next to the lake, going to Shed Aquarium, going to the Brookfield Zoo. So in my career as a development professional, I've done it all from frontline fundraising to volunteer management to events. And I always loved the events part a lot more than everything else. So I decided that in my career, I wanted to be an event planner. And here I am in Chicago at the Shed Aquarium, planning these really wonderful events for a lot of different audiences at Shed Aquarium. And I know we'll get into that a little bit more as we go into our discussion. But I'm so excited to be here and to just talk to you guys for a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. Thank you both again for being here. Really appreciate you taking the time out of both of your busy schedules to spend a Saturday with us. So jumping right into this discussion, both of you are Zoo Aquarium Museum. We use the acronym just to go through it faster, ZAM professionals. And you both have really unique experiences in event creation, curation in those types of facilities. So just to start us off, what were some pivotal experiences that have shaped your approach to event planning, fundraising as a ZAM professional? And are there any specific experiences of events in the past that have worked really well for you? What has kind of shaped your, I guess, bucket of knowledge in terms of planning these events, and taking that into a perspective of a young person who maybe has never planned an event before or has participated in an event at a zoo, aquarium, or museum, but wants to get a little bit more involved? How can they go about kind of starting their event planning? So I will pass it off to either one of you. If one of you wants to take it first, I'll let you both just go ahead.
Sure. Well, I can speak a little bit to this because when I started at Shed, and I have a background in foundations and educational nonprofits, so that's where I did most of my events coming up as a professional. And I moved into Shed right as the pandemic was weaning off a little bit. Shed Aquarium was still closed to the public when I started my tenure at Shed. So really, what I had to do is come in and think of events and programming in a way that you can't be there in person. So I think the pivotal experience for me was starting at Shed Aquarium and realizing all of the different formats that we could create programming for people, and actually realizing that people love it, right? People do like virtual events. They do want to have virtual encounters with animals. I think people, if they have an interest in that topic, they will want to view and be there and ask questions. So for me, like I said, pivotal for my career was really the pandemic, and coming off of that from having to learn virtual event planning and virtual programming, which I had never done before. And that opened up a whole new avenue for me as a career event planner.
That's a awesome answer. I think I'll just add to it a little bit. One thing that has I've recently kind of transitioned. So when I first started my job at Frost Science, which was a little more than a year ago now, I was just kind of gifted the special events and said, here, plan them. And it's a lot to take on, especially when you're trying to coordinate between like academics, local nonprofits, other teachers, local teachers, like getting all these people here to the museum it's a lot of work, and the logistics and stuff. And so I think one thing that is particularly important to keep in mind if you're just starting out planning these things is don't try to do it all by yourself, right? Work with a team and make sure that everyone knows their job, and that you don't like everyone takes ownership of their job, right? So if someone's in charge of food, that person is the point person for food, and you should not, like, if it's not you, you don't need to meddle in what they're doing, right? Just do your job. And if you're in charge, make sure you delegate things effectively. Don't be afraid to pass off work to other people, because that's what a team is about. And every team needs a strong leader. So like, don't be shy about delegating things, because without someone who is clearly in charge, everyone and no one is in charge, and then things can go awry.
Yeah, thank you both. I think, Cassie, what you just mentioned will lead us into our next discussion question, but I also want to touch on something that Liz said, just about, coming in the middle of the pandemic. That is exactly what happened to me in this position, and adjusting to doing online programming and all of that can definitely, it almost forces you to change the way that you think about events. And, I don't want to discount anybody who even, were kind of out of the main chunk of the pandemic. I'm hesitant to say that the pandemic is over, but, we're still very much having in-person events now. People are still definitely holding virtual events as well. And I think that that is definitely a good stepping stone for young people to get into event planning as well, because you're not dealing as much with the complicated fundraising side of things. Sometimes you are a little bit depending on the situation, but you're not dealing with, food or ticketing or, physical presentations or any of that sort of thing, your venue or all of that. So definitely want to have everybody remember that as we are talking about events today, we also are including virtual events in this conversation. So going back to what Cassie said, kind of putting your team together, that definitely brings us to our next question slide. We'll talk about our team here in a little bit, but I want to focus on these up here. So whenever we plan an event, right, we want to make sure that there is cohesion, that everybody knows what that event is there to celebrate or what you're there to kind of do together in person or virtually. And for World Ocean Day, as an example, every year we have our annual action theme. And I'll talk a little bit more about the World Ocean Day action theme specifically, but one of the reasons that we do that is so that people who are hosting World Ocean Day events all around the world, we can kind of have this community moment and this collective action around this one central idea. And that's really helpful to create that cohesion that we're talking about. So when you're in the event planning stages, how do you actually, create your purpose? How do you figure out what that's going to be? What are the factors that influence what that mission is going to be? And then this kind of third question here, how do you align the event's purpose with your broader organizational or community goals? Because you can have that kind of central theme, but you also want to make sure that that theme is actually serving the community that you want to invite to the event. And then also as an organization, you want to make sure that it's aligned with your goals and your mission statement and all of that. So yeah, I'll pass it over to either of you want to take it first.
Sure. Well, I'm thinking about this as all the different kinds of events that you can do. And I'm thinking of when I am planning a fundraising event versus, say, a member benefit event that is just to fulfill that. And a fundraising event, like we start planning our gala about a year and a half out before the date. So, 18 months or so before the actual date, we're picking a date, we've got co-chairs. So starting to plan an event, really a brief that has all of the information that you need for this event, because that then has to be shopped around to all of the stakeholders in the organization. And this will change depending on the size of the organization. But an organization as big as Shed, really the first things first is getting everybody's buy-in so that you're starting from a good point. And that means, everything from who's the co-chair to what's the program, what is the theme going to be. And once those are established, really looking at what are we talking about this year in our messaging for the larger organization. Because, Shed is really big and we've got so much stuff going on, but there's always a focus that we weave throughout all of our messaging for the year. And really, I try to align all of my events so that they're aligning with this messaging calendar that's from a whole different team, but I've got my own calendar that sort of overlays, and all of my events come together with that messaging. So the programming really helps. And that also helps segment who we're going to invite, right? Because we're not going to do an event for everybody, but we may be doing events for certain audiences, and that will align with this larger messaging calendar. So I think really that helps us stay true to who our community is and what we're trying to talk about and the message that we're sending out. And that changes based on who we're talking to. We may have donors who are higher level and know a lot more because of the way that they're donating versus others who, we're bringing them along at a mass communication scale, not really the detailed scale. So there's a lot that goes into an event, not just sort of the logistics of planning, but having that foresight of what is the strategy and what are we talking about, and aligning that with what the other or the rest of the organization is talking about.
And again, I'll just add, I think, to something that Liz touched on nicely, which is that you should know your audience. And that's certainly not the last time you all will hear those three words put together today. Probably not even from me. You have to know your audience, and you have to know what they expect going to an event like this, and then also what you want to accomplish. So for like an easy example, if I'm throwing an event for scientists, they might really love having someone on stage giving a 40-minute presentation with, slides and graphs. For the public, absolutely not. We've learned that, like, even if we do short versions of that at some of our larger public events, only 10 minutes, people just don't want to come. They don't want to stand around. They want to be moving. They want to be doing hands-on things. A lot of people bring their kids, which is another consideration for us, family events. And so that shapes then what we think we can accomplish, and then we can kind of select a theme, from there.
Yeah, I think absolutely audience matters so much, especially when you're dealing with larger organizations, because what I'm going to do for members is going to be very different than what I would do for, say, our corporate partners. And, in my role, I'm planning sort of the engagement calendar throughout for all of our audiences that fall under development. But then we've got like marketing audiences, and they've got their own events and their own messaging. And it's one big communications machine when you think about sort of this type of engagement at bigger organizations.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for both of your really in-depth responses to this, because I think, and Cassie, you're completely correct in saying that we will absolutely continue talking about knowing your audience, both in this session today and in our session next weekend for social media and communications, definitely. But I think that you both kind of, without saying it directly, planning your event backwards can be super, super helpful when you have like your end goal and you know, these are the outcomes that we want to have. This is the purpose that we want to, you know, move to those outcomes through. It makes it a lot easier to kind of work your way backwards and kind of separate everything out into their own departments. Like Cassie, you mentioned earlier, talking about teams, you know, if you're not focused on food, don't be focused on food. Have somebody else doing that for you. Or rather not for you, but as a part of the team, have somebody directly in charge of that specific thing. And that definitely moves us into our next question, which is, again, what are some of the things that are important to consider when trying to put together a team to help run your event? Cassie, again, you had mentioned, you know, you want to have somebody who is the team leader, but there's a lot of different ways that people can have leadership roles in putting together events. So if you want to take this one, and then Liz, you can add, or whoever wants to go next, feel free.
Yeah, I think it's important first to just sit down and maybe make a list, even if you don't have the full shape of what your event looks like. Make a list of what you know you're going to need, like skills wise, right? So you're going to need someone who can maybe handle money. You're going to need someone who is great at logistics. You're going to need someone who maybe is great at talking to people. You need someone who knows how to negotiate catering contracts, right? You can kind of come up with those lists of needs, and then you can start to fill in the roles with different people with different skills. And you always, I mean, at least I've found, you know, at the museum when we run big events, I'm sure Liz knows this too, you need a much bigger team and a broader team than you think you need. So we have, you know, everyone from our event sales folks down to our catering group, down to our educational team involved in a lot of our events, because everyone has their own role to play.
Yeah, I have to piggyback on that and say that having somebody who is in charge and who somebody can look to when we are in the event is really, really important. And I'm thinking of my team, and we've got, a big gala that like I said, we planned for a year and a half. My boss is in charge, but on that day, people know that I'm in charge because I'm giving direction. I've put the staff plan together. And I've also said, do not bother my boss because she is going to have a million things to do. But it's having that sort of systematic, like, here's the second person that I can ask if I can't find that first person. So just having a little bit of a hierarchy in how the day is going to work and who people can ask questions to, that's super important. And I think the pre-prep, right? So it's also, you put your team together, but it's prepping them in the appropriate way to be able to execute your event. I think that is one of the most important things, because you could put a great team together, and at the end of the day, as an event planner, you're the boss. You're the person who is we call it the MRP, which is the most responsible person that day. So it's really about prepping the team. Once you've chosen and you know who needs to be there and who needs to do what, it's prepping them to be able to do those jobs so that they feel responsible for it and that they feel ready for it. I think that's one of the biggest things, especially managing a bigger staff, right? Because sometimes you'll have an event and you've worked on it for 2 years or a year or whatever it is. And then at the end of the day, there's 40 staff members who then need to execute for you. So it's all about the pre-prep for me. Once you've chosen who's going to be on your list, it's really getting them ready for it.
That's right. And if you're the day of, or MRP, whatever you call yourself, you should be a person who likes to make decisions, even if sometimes you get them a little wrong. Like, you need to be a decision maker. And if that's not you, totally fine. You just might need someone else to step into that role, because the little things that arise on the day of are things you won't have thought about, but they will need a decision like 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, and I think at a certain point, if you are, if you're working with friends, let's say you're planning an event with friends or with a group or a class or a club at school, you're going to kind of know people. You're going to know who they are and how they operate. Like maybe you'll see like, you know, my friend Cassie is really, really anxious. She may not be the person that needs to go do this thing that needs to happen in 1 minute, you know, or somebody who's timed. Or you may know, you know, somebody, Laura, who is really good at giving orders. So you're going to give that person the job that is going to manage a few people that day, right? So I think it's really knowing who your staff is and kind of understanding their quirks and what's going to fit. Because honestly, there's no worse feeling in my experience than giving somebody the wrong job that's going to stress them out and that's going to stress you out because you know they're not doing a good job. So it really, I think it's knowing who you're working with to put them in the appropriate place.
Yeah, 100%. Thank you both. I really appreciate the discussion about knowing, again, not just your audience for the event itself, but knowing, excuse me, knowing who is in your network, who can you tap into to help bring this event to life, whether it, like you said, Liz, somebody in class, somebody you go to school with, somebody who's in a club or possibly a sports team, or, you know, somebody who is in your zoo, aquarium, museum, you know, teen volunteer program, or, you know, somebody who you went to camp with, or, you know, something like that. And each individual person brings a specific skill set to the table, and being able to best assign and delegate different things to those people is hugely important. So, and I know it can be a little stressful as a young person, especially if you've never done an event before, whether it's virtual or in person, no matter what type of event you're planning. If you've never been in that most, I'm forgetting the acronym now, the most responsible person, if you've never been in that role before, it can be a little intimidating. So if you know that the people you've surrounded yourself with are able to, you know, be people you can lean on if you have a task that is happening in 1 minute and it needs to be done, that will definitely help kind of alleviate some of that anxiety for yourself, I think. So yeah, thank you both for that. It's really, really helpful. So kind of going back to this planning backwards situation, I want to kind of break down the, I guess, time chunks of what it takes to plan an event. And this is something that we will talk, again, like I mentioned, a lot about in our social media and communication session next weekend, specifically about promotion and interacting with your potential audience and stuff. But there are other ways that you want to engage with people, let people know that your event is happening. What is your event about? So let's start with talking about the pre-event. What are some effective strategies to promote your event to your target audience? Once you've figured out, you know, you've sat down with your team, you've figured out what your goals are for the event, how do you go about getting the word out there?
Well, the nice thing about working at a zoo, aquarium, or museum is that often you have a marketing team to help you do that. But of course, you all may not have marketing teams, or you might be your own marketing team. So I just, and it sounds obvious, but sit down and kind of make a list about what groups and people you already know that can help you spread the word. These might be, like, again, groups at your school, groups in other clubs or sports you're involved in, groups on social media, maybe using a certain hashtag and tagging certain people in your promotional materials to ask them to share it. I mean, social media these days is integral to advertising any event for sure. And so you'll talk a lot about that next week, it sounds like. But that's one of the best ways.
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think so. You know, at Shed, what we build is called a communication cascade. So we know every touch point that's going to go out about the event to all the different audiences. And part of that, right, is a save the date. It's really easy to think, right? But people have so much on their calendars that sending a date as soon as you have it and as soon as you know it's confirmed, so that people can save that date on their calendars and know that this is coming up. And then you communicate again and again before you get to the actual event. So at Shed, we send a save the date, we send another email reminder, and then we send another email reminder closer to the event. So that is helpful to get some of those people who may have forgotten, who may have seen the email but didn't register. So I think communicating, and our communications team is very, very stingy on the amount of emails that we can send with events. It's all a formula that I personally don't understand, but they know that two emails and one reminder, right? So it's 2 emails about the event, 1 reminder, nothing else. We cannot send anything else. People will be turned off by it. They'll ignore it. It'll just become, part of that background noise in our inboxes. So really that's the formula that has worked for us, which is 3 emails tops about the event. But then you can build that out any way you want, right? You can build that out as a save the date, like I said, as a formal invitation, and then as a fun reminder or a teaser at the end, right before the event. So I think, we find that email works really well for different audiences. We do print. So, that's something that's interesting. A lot of people say that print has gone out of fashion. We think it's coming back in fashion, and people really do like getting a bulky, nice invitation in the mail, especially for really high-end events such as our gala and other donor events in that way. But know your audience. I don't know if a lot of young people would be looking in the mail for an invitation, but as you move through your careers, I think that's something to consider.
Yeah, and maybe just one more tiny thing. And again, you might touch on this next week, but on social media, you can also buy ads. So if you have a small budget, like even a small budget can actually go a long way. And say you don't have a list of folks you want to invite the public, maybe people aged 18 to 25. You can actually build out targeted ads on social media and pay a small fee, and your event post will get delivered onto the pages of those folks as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Cassie. Thank you for adding that. We'll talk a little bit more about budget and fundraising in our next slide discussion. But I also, I just wanted to add before we move into the during event question, that one thing that I would just want to remind any young person who is, doing a bunch of promotion for your event, I think at the beginning, just getting the word out to as many people as you possibly can is really helpful. I like Liz's point about not wanting to spam with the emails as well, because we have to deal with that with the Ocean Project and World Ocean Day as well. We definitely don't want to overwhelm people's email inboxes, but the more individuals or organizations you can reach out to help them promote or have them help you promote is really helpful, because sometimes what will happen is you'll have, let's say 200 people RSVP for an event, and then only 50 or 60 people show up. 50 or 60 people, that's still a lot of people, and you might have planned for a lot more based on your number of RSVPs, but almost never, it doesn't matter what kind of event you're going to have, almost never will you have 100% attendance rate from your RSVPs. So I think just keeping that in the back of your head is just something that's really important, because you don't want to get really excited and then kind of disappoint yourself if you don't have 100%. So just manage your expectations a little bit. I think that's just some helpful advice, just my 2 cents.
Laura, I have to jump in here because
Yeah.
in the 10 years that I've been doing events, 20% will not show up. This has been a standard number. It kind of went up and down around the pandemic, but I have found that at least 20% will not show up. That counts for a 10-person dinner party. One couple will not show up. That counts for a 1,200-person conference. You can almost always count on that 20% not showing up. And I swear it's been proven to me time and time again. So I'm sharing that hot tip here.
Yeah, thank you, Liz.
And for us, that number is higher if it's free. I don't know if that's true for you too, Liz, but if people can just kind of register willy-nilly and forget about it, I mean, you'll be sometimes lucky if 20% show up.
Yeah.
100%. As in virtual events, I think also people feel more inclined to not have to show up if there's a recording that's being shared after. We do see a higher number of drop-offs for virtual, and from free events, definitely we will see that a much higher number of drop-offs.
Yeah. Thank you both for adding that. I just wanted to just drop that in there because I've seen it happen where a young person will, spend so much time and energy like you do planning these kinds of events, and they just get really sad and dejected almost when they realize that not everybody who said they were going to show up shows up. And it's unfortunate, but also we just have to kind of give people grace sometimes. Life happens. People are in school, people have families, they have jobs. Sometimes things overlap and they don't realize, like, stuff happens, and we just kind of have to manage our expectations. So moving into the current event, that sounds weird to phrase it that way, when the event is actually happening, we want to make sure that our audience there has a really enjoyable time, really memorable time. So how can you actually engage with the people? We just talked about engaging with our audience beforehand. So while they're at the event, what role do interactive elements or activities play in creating a memorable and impactful event experience?
So I'll talk for us at Frost Science, because a lot of our audience is families. This is like everything. And most of the events that we have are for families. Of course, we also have like the gala and the member events, and they're a little different. But when we celebrate special event days, including World Ocean Day, we actually require that every group who's participating comes with a hands-on interactive activity for their table. Because if your table, or if you have folks who are just showing up to hand out information, people are going to take that and put it in their bag and never read it ever again and throw it away, like next winter when it's all crumpled up at the bottom of their purse. So hands-on activities are a must for us.
Same with our events, even for like the highest level donor that we have coming up, even if they're not young or have kids, we always want something that will engage them so that they can see, we call it looking nature in the eye, right? So that's a really big thing that we try to do in all of aspects of our engagement, is how can we help you look nature in the eye every time you come to Shed? So that might include animal experiences. Sometimes I'm like, bring me a macaw, and the animal team brings me a macaw, and then they fly, and it's really cool, and it's really impactful to have that happen as you're walking into Shed for a tour, for a lunch. A lot of what I do is prepping our donors to be asked for money, right? So it's how can we get them excited and delighted right before our gift officers come and say, hey, will you give me $1 million, or will you give me this? And that runs the gamut. That's our donors. But when you think about our member events, when our members come to Shed, they want to see things from behind the scenes, front of scenes. They want to have that exclusive look at things that maybe the public may not see every day. So I think for us, bringing these interactive elements is not only going to help with getting people excited and delighted, but it helps folks learn what we're actually doing from behind the scenes when we bring it front of scenes and make it interactive in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, if you're on even a small budget, don't underestimate the power of a photo booth. If people can go home with like a fun photo, that literally makes it like their experience visible to them every time they look at that photo. And they might post it on social media and kind of increase momentum for your next event. So even a cheap photo booth is awesome.
Truly, and I don't, not everybody's going to have the resources of the Shed Aquarium, so I'll speak to a couple of other things. In my programs, I love to do polling. I love to do Q&A. So any chance that you have for the audience to be able to ask questions or to, trivia, folks love trivia, and it's super interactive. So no matter what type of program you have, you can always fit in a couple of trivia slides or questions to get people excited and get them, going. So I think these are like free things that you're able to do, and copy into any event that you're doing, whether virtual or in person.
Yeah, absolutely. I like the inclusion of the photo booth because I was going to add, doing these hands-on activities is hugely, hugely impactful. Cassie, like you said, for families specifically, even if it's not a family-oriented event, also like Liz said. But if you have like a bunch of teenagers, taking pictures for social media is like a huge thing. And like you both mentioned, even if you don't have a budget for a photo booth, even just creating, and again, we'll talk more about this next week, a hashtag that people can share photos on social media, that's still a form of engagement, interaction with your audience via social media. And that can be before, during, and after your event as well. So yeah, thank you both for talking about during the event. Now, after the event, everybody's gone home. We've slept on it. Everybody's like, okay, weight off of our shoulders. We're done. We can pack it up, right? Nobody's ever going to think about that ever again. Wrong. You want to make sure that your impact goes even beyond just the day of the event. So there are ways that you can have that happen, doing hands-on events during the event or hands-on activities during the event. But how can you actually tell that people were positively impacted by attending your event? How can you tell whether you actually achieved your goal when you first sat down and wrote out your purpose and your mission for the event? So as young people hosting these events, what are some good ways that they can assess their impact? And then how can we go about maintaining some of those connections? Your event might be annual. You might want to re-invite people back next year. You might have other events going on that kind of have similar audiences. How do you get more people to those and reach out to people who have, previously attended your events? So yeah, how do you just make sure that your impact goes on beyond your event?
Yeah, I think something to think about when you're working on pre-event is how are you going to collect data during your event? So how are you going to get people's emails if you don't have them already to continue to communicate with them after they leave? And I think this is something that organizations struggle a lot with, and we try to think of all these different kinds of ways to get some of this data, and we call it retention, right? And I think some of the retention, it's hard to do. I will say personally, I think it's hard to do retention. But I think for young folks, when you're thinking about it, is how can I create some social media buzz, and how can I collect some of that data, people's Instagram handles, get some of those follows, and be intentional about it when you're at the event, as opposed to thinking about it afterwards. Because I think that's what happens a lot. We're mired in all the details, and then we think about, oh, we should have done this, we should have done that. So I think it's a lot of that pre-planning to be able to get some of those details.
That is exactly what I was going to say. And my little light just went off, so I'll fix it in a minute. But I think you need to be assessing the impact of your event during the event. So I mean, the way that we do it is we might do kind of short surveys during an event, maybe for a little prize. And another thing that we've started doing is creating word clouds that people can populate at the event, asking them, some kind of strategic question. And then we're gathering their responses as we go, and we have that later to look at. Follow-up surveys are something that nearly everyone, I think, does after an event, but the rate of response to those are often very, very low, unless your people are super engaged or you're offering them some kind of incentive for doing it. And so you really can't rely on a post-event survey if you want to learn about the impact of your event. You need to be doing something during your event, which is, essentially what Liz said as well.
Yeah, and I think if we're thinking about how to assess impact, you want to create those metrics beforehand so you know what you're assessing when you're there. So it's, thinking about what would a win look like for me with this event? Is it number of RSVPs? Is it amount of dollars raised? Is it actual attendees? Is it social media hits? So it's thinking about that beforehand, like what are my wins? And then when you're at the event afterwards, you can assess. And, you know, this means sort of bringing in your staff, anybody who was at the event, and having conversations about what went right, what went wrong, how can we improve, anything that was missing that didn't happen the way, you know. So it's really about the debrief at the end, and then having those set metrics beforehand so that you know you've met them once the event is over.
After our events, we do this thing called, I think we call it like roses, thorns, and buds. Yeah, you're nodding, Liz. So roses are like things that went well. Thorns are things that maybe didn't go so well that you need to fix maybe for next time. And then buds are things that ideas that you have for next time. So maybe things that you trialed a little bit or things that you didn't try at all that you think might work now that you've gone through the event once. And then we write all that down and save it for the next year.
Yeah, and that's the exciting part about events, is that you're going to work really, really hard to get the event executed. But at the end, you get to make it better next year. Like, it's never going to stay this, it should never stay the same. It should always be improved. And I think as a younger event planner, I used to get very nervous, and, you know, I would get hot when we would have these debriefs because I hated the feedback. You know, and it's not about hating the feedback, because the feedback's actually going to make you a better event planner, and it's going to make it a better event for the future and more successful at that. So I think it's not being afraid about critiques, not being afraid about feedback. I think as event planners, we always like to be in control and control everything. And this is one of those times where you just have to sit, be quiet, and just take it in. But it's such an important part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. It just brings us back to, you know, working our way backwards, thinking about all of this in advance. What are the things that you can anticipate during the planning stage for even after the event is done? And one thing I do want to add about just collecting people's email addresses and their just general information, you can do that in the RSVP. You know, that's a pretty simple way, especially I think that's kind of a given, especially for online events, but even for in-person events, like feel free to ask for that kind of information. You don't want to be asking like for very detailed personal information on your RSVPs, but an email address, even just as an optional, like submission question for the RSVP is very, very helpful for all of this post-event conversation. So now moving towards our last, and then we have a little bit of time for Q&A. So I kind of want to move through these a little bit quickly, and you guys have touched on a lot of this already as you're talking about your experiences working directly with ZAM. So just going through all of these questions, there are opportunities when these events happen for two-way learning, both from the youth event planner perspective and from the ZAM. So we want to kind of talk about how that can be facilitated, and then how can ZAM facilities actually support young people to host their own events again, and vice versa. We want to make sure that this is a mutually beneficial relationship between all of the young people who are in ZAM programming and the ZAM facilities themselves. And then also, I'm just curious to know, and I'm sure our audiences as well, with your respective facilities specifically, how do you guys actually stay up to date on what your younger audiences are interested in as far as events are concerned? So I will pass it off to both of you.
I actually have a really good answer for this, because just this past November, so Shed Aquarium has a young professionals board called the Auxiliary Board. And they're, you know, younger, I would say like 20s to mid 30s. They help plan events for Shed. They help recruit other young folks for Shed. And they really, you know, we've got quarterly meetings for them. Some of them join our larger trustee board for their meetings. And they're insiders for Shed. In November, we partnered with our teen council at Shed Aquarium. So this is a different department that runs this, but we partnered with that department and our teen council and the aquarium council, or the auxiliary board together for a career day. So taking two different audiences at Shed Aquarium, putting them together, using the expertise of the auxiliary board. This was something for them as a volunteer project, right? They planned the event, they planned all the programming, all the logistics, and then we brought them together with our learning team and the teen council. So I think really that's where there is that opportunity, because I think a lot of ZAMs have learning teams and learning programs where they are bringing in either elementary school kids, high school, grade school, high school kids for that programming. So I think there's always that opportunity to bring them into the fold for, other programming that's happening at the aquarium. So it sort of serves that twofold, where our auxiliary board feels really, really great that they're able to help out in this way that's brand new to them, and learn more about our learning program. And our teen council is able to come in, get some of the benefits from the career day, and also learn about the auxiliary board, which is something that they can move up into as they age. And, in our Aux board, we have a really good example of this, because we have an Aux board member who started as a teen council member and started when they were 15, 16, loved Shed so much, went to college, did their thing, and then came back to Shed as an Aux board member. So I think there's funnels, there's different funnels that can happen at these organizations. Whether you're aging out of teen council, there's always other places for you to sort of come into these organizations at the ground up.
Yeah, that's a awesome answer. We don't have, like, we're not as big as Shed, so we don't have a teen council or anything, but we do have a few programs for teens. And we always give those groups the opportunity to participate in our special event days, which would look like having their own table with their own activity that they run. They don't always have the time or the bandwidth to take us up on that, but we do give them that opportunity. They're free to, help with the event if they wish to learn about that. I think we're since we are somewhat smaller, we can be super flexible in the ways that we involve people in our activities, which is a benefit of being a little smaller. And then I think in terms of how zoos and aquariums stay attuned to the preferences and interests of younger folks, ask, honestly. I have no qualms about asking people around me, like, is this cool? Is this interesting, right? Is this good for you? And when colleagues ask me too, like, hey, how can we tailor this thing for a younger audience? I always say, like, just go ask them, like, make it and then go show it to them and ask them if they like it or not. Or if it's cool, like, see their reaction. And then also we have a younger staff. I think our staff kind of skews younger, especially in our marketing department. And so they are constantly on the lookout for, like, what are the new memes? What's the trend on TikTok and stuff like that? So we lean on each other when we're trying to decide if something is appropriate for a younger audience.
Yeah, I want to hop in and just add that, first of all, thank you for emphasizing the importance of this intergenerational collaboration. That's kind of what I was getting at with these questions. It's just so important, both for the institutions, the facilities themselves, and for the young people who are getting involved. But for this last question, Cassie, what you just said, asking young people, I think that I also just want to share with our audience that if you're a young person who is involved in one of these kinds of programs at one of these facilities, if you have an idea for something, you can also go ask whoever is in charge of your program, or, your manager for your volunteer program, or whatever it is. If you have an idea, bring it to them. Don't be afraid to, bring questions to the table and kind of make a seat for yourself at the decision-making table, because a lot of the time that's one of the core purposes of having youth programming at these facilities, is to help, bring young people into that process. So yeah, thank you guys very much for this wonderful discussion. We do have a few minutes for some Q&A, and we do have one question in the Q&A right now. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to, again, share them in the chat or use the Q&A feature. But I will throw this out to both of you. We have Savannah, who asked, do you still prefer, this is going back to talking about RSVPs. Do you still prepare for all of the RSVPs just in case, or do you rely on the 20% not being there? What do you do if you have extra materials or food? That's a great question.
That's a really good question. And since I threw out that 20% tip, I can speak to this a little bit. I will say that when you're catering larger events, I do take the 20% off the top because it does end up becoming more costly. And also you'll know your audience. So like at Shed, I know my audience and I know that our members are going to drop off significantly from free events. So part of the way we mitigate that is we oversell. Right. So I don't cut off registration once we hit capacity because I know 20 or more percent probably are not going to show up. So I like to oversell a little bit to get some of those people in the door. But for smaller events, I always do like to prepare and ensure, like if I'm having a meeting for 10 people, I'll make sure there's 10 chairs and I'll make sure there's, 10 settings for those people, knowing that maybe one or two may not show up. So I think it really depends on the size of your event. And it depends on, like, for me, I've got a catering team that is taking care of me and is working internally at Shed to provide all of these things. So they know what our people are like, and they know I'm going to prepare a little bit extra, but know that this is probably going to be the cutoff. So I think for smaller events, like I said, always prepare for everybody to show up, especially when you're talking about 10, 15, 20 people. When you're thinking about 150, 250, I think taking the 20% off the top is usually a safe bet.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Liz. And I think that we just got this other question from Ella. She said, my friend and I run a nonprofit and have raised a lot of money locally, but are looking to raise more awareness outside of our circles. Do you have any tips for promoting our business and cause and getting the word out to more people? I just also want to pop in here, and because it kind of also relates to the last question, and then I'll let you guys take this one. Asking other businesses around you in your community, other organizations and other nonprofits to see if they can give free food or print free materials or things like that is also a really helpful way of, like, we didn't really talk about fundraising, but I just wanted to throw that in there. So yeah, if you guys have any tips about working with community members and other stakeholders to get the word out there, go ahead.
So, I think I have maybe two tips for Ella. One is to be creative in the types of people you think are interested in what you do. Like, I don't know what your nonprofit is, but think a little bit outside the box in terms of how you might get new folks interested. Maybe your business or your nonprofit is targeting children, but you have a lot of maybe senior citizens in your community. They're grandparents, right? So if you can get the grandparents on board, you might drum up some more support for your cause. If it's a business, you could also offer some kind of incentive. If someone brings a friend, recommends a friend, and they buy something from you, maybe they get a 10% off code or something. So I think there's ways to do this, and you just have to think, again, a little bit outside the box and see what you catch, right? You cast a wide net and see what you get.
Yeah, I think I agree, Cassie. And I also feel that for younger people, I think content is so important. Storytelling is so important. It's like, what are you doing in your daily life to create a story for yourself on social media? You could do that for your business. And I think people are interested in that and interested in knowing what that story is. If you're a young person that created this nonprofit, there's a story already there to tell, right? So how do you tell that story? Through content? I think, I don't use TikTok personally, but I know that TikTok is a really good way to have something go viral, specifically if your content aligns, right? So I think it's really thinking about that and how could you create your own content that is going to, not only be local, but, like Cassie said, blast it out there for others to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys both so much. There's one more question asking about, does this program, give out a certificate at the end. We will have a follow-up survey talking about how do we engage with our audience after the event. Yes, we will have a follow-up survey, and if you are able to complete that survey, we will send out you a certificate. So I'm just going to head into announcements really quickly before I let you all go. We are at the top of the hour. Again, session 3, social media and communications, next Saturday, same time, same place. And the Saturday after that is session 4, campaign organizing. I also mentioned at the beginning our 2024 World Ocean Day action theme, which is catalyzing action for the ocean and climate. The ocean is one of our greatest allies in the fight against climate change, and we are spending 2024 every single month talking about a specific action focus under the ocean climate umbrella. So for this month, for January, we are focused on ocean and climate literacy. So we have a bunch of resources on the World Ocean Day website that you guys can all go check out and educate yourself and members of your networks about the connection between the ocean and climate. And next month for February is environmental justice. So we'll have a bunch of resources and webinars and exciting stuff coming up for that as well. I think that's it. The link to the YouTube channel for World Ocean Day with the recording to this session and session 1 will be included in the follow-up email that you get automated from Zoom. But if you can't find it, just go to YouTube, search World Ocean Day. I'll try to find the link in just a moment. But last but not least, I just want to say big thank you to Liz and Cassie so much for joining us on Saturday. This was a really wonderful discussion. And again, so super appreciative for both of you taking the time to spend with us. It was a wonderful conversation. I am sending my email address in the chat here for anybody who has any additional questions that you want answered. Feel free to send me an email. But yeah, thank you guys again. And I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Saturday and weekend.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thanks, Laura. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Bye, everyone. Have a great weekend.